He was a Navy SEAL who lost his home in the coldest season of the year, with only his dog beside him. The world he knew was taken by paper and silence, but something in the snow was waiting for him. His dog didn't hesitate. It led him into the forest, as if it already knew where survival lived. What they found wasn't just shelter, it was something buried, forgotten, and powerful enough to save lives. As the storm closed in, strangers began to arrive, and one small house became their last hope. But the real question is, was it luck, or something greater guiding them all along? Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, like and subscribe to support us, help us reach 1,000 followers, so we can share more meaningful stories. Now let's begin. Morning arrived with the kind of light that made everything look honest. Too honest. It slid across the frost-covered roofs of Morrow Ridge, turning each cabin into something delicate, almost sacred, until you looked closer and saw the cracks, the sagging beams, the smoke that rose thinner than it should have. Winter hadn't fully arrived yet, but it was already rehearsing. Gideon Thorne stood in the yard of what used to be his home. He didn't move. He rarely did when something mattered. At 35, he carried himself like a man who had long ago learned that movement wasted energy unless it had purpose. He stood tall, just over 6 feet, with a lean, hardened build, shaped by years of discipline rather than vanity. No wasted muscle, no softness. His face was clean-shaven, but the sharp lines of his jaw and cheekbones exposed to the cold like something carved from stone. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, though it had grown slightly longer than regulation, just enough to show that he no longer answered to anyone. His eyes, gray-blue and steady, didn't burn. They didn't plead. They observed. They remembered. And today, they accepted. He wore the same thing he always wore, a faded olive tactical combat shirt, the fabric softened by time and weather, worn thin at the cuffs and shoulders. Beneath it, the faint edge of a deep red thermal layer peeked through. His combat pants were old, earth-toned, scuffed at the knees, the pockets sagging slightly from years of use. His boots were military issue, heavy, reliable, scarred. And on his wrist, a watch that had seen more than most people ever would. Beside him stood Rook. The German Shepherd was 6 years old, and built like something meant to endure. His coat was a mix of sable tones, black, gray, and muted tan that blended almost imperfectly into the winter landscape. His amber eyes moved constantly, reading the world in ways humans forgot how to. A black harness wrapped around his chest, trimmed with a subtle deep red, worn but maintained. Functional. Nothing decorative. Rook wasn't restless, but he wasn't calm either. His ears twitched, his weight shifted, and his gaze kept drifting, not toward the house, but beyond it, toward the trees, toward something unseen. "You don't like it either," Gideon murmured, voice low, more breath than sound. Rook didn't answer. He didn't need to. Across the yard, 3 men stood near the porch. The first was Calder Wren. 50, maybe older, the kind of man who aged not by years, but by decisions. His posture was precise, his coat dark and clean despite the frost, his gloves unmarked. His face carried no cruelty, only certainty, as the kind that came from numbers lining up exactly as expected. He wasn't here to argue. He was here to conclude. Next to him stood Deputy Cole Mercer, younger early 30s. Broad-shouldered, but not imposing. His ranger green jacket carried the faint dusting of snow that hadn't yet melted, and a radio clipped to his shoulder crackled occasionally with nothing important. His hair was light brown, cut short, practical, His face held something softer than Calder's, something unfinished. He looked at Gideon, then away, then back again, as if trying to remember which version of the man he was supposed to see. The third man, barely noticeable, carried papers. A clerk, someone who wrote things down so others wouldn't have to remember them. Calder stepped forward. "Mr. Thorne," he said, voice calm, controlled. "The property is no longer under your legal possession." No anger, no apology, just fact. Gideon nodded once. "I read the documents." Cole shifted slightly. Well, that was the thing about Gideon. He didn't raise his voice, didn't protest, didn't give people the fight they expected. And somehow, that made it worse. "There were notices," Calder continued. "Multiple. You were not present to respond." "I was working." It was the only explanation Gideon offered. Not where, not why. Just enough to confirm that yes, he had been somewhere else when his life was being dismantled. Calder didn't care. Unfortunately, absence does not suspend obligation. Gideon almost smiled at that. Almost. Because he had heard variations of that sentence in places far worse than this quiet northern town. Places where absence meant death. Here, it meant paperwork. Cole stepped forward, his boots crunching lightly in the frost. "Gideon, we can give you some time to gather your things." His voice wasn't authoritative. It was human. Gideon looked at him properly now. Cole Mercer had the look of a man who still believed there were lines that shouldn't be crossed. But he wore a badge that required him to stand on one side of those lines, regardless of how he felt about them. Gideon respected that. Didn't forgive it, but respected it. "I'm already done," Gideon said. And he was. There wasn't much left to take. A few tools, a bag. The rest had already been reduced to things that didn't matter. Rook moved then, not toward the men, not toward the house. He turned, slowly, toward the north edge of the property, toward the trees. And then he froze. Rook lowered his head, ears forward, body rigid in a way Gideon had only seen in two situations. When the dog had found something dangerous, or when it had found something important. Not prey, not threat, something else. Rook stepped forward once, then twice, then stopped again, staring into the thin line of forest where frost clung to the branches like glass. There was nothing there. No movement. No sound. And yet, the dog let out a low, almost inaudible growl, not aggressive, not fearful, calling. Gideon felt something shift in his chest. Small, quiet, but undeniable. The same feeling he used to get before things went wrong. Or right. "Rook," he said softly. The dog didn't look back. He was already gone in his mind, already somewhere Gideon couldn't see yet. And for a moment, Gideon considered ignoring it. Just this once. Just this one time, he thought. I could not follow. But he knew himself too well. And Rook, even better. "Mr. Thorne," Calder said, breaking the moment. "We'll be securing the property by noon." Gideon nodded again. It didn't matter. That place had already let him go. Or maybe it never truly belonged to him in the first place. He turned, walking toward the old pickup parked near the road. Each step was deliberate, measured. The kind of walking that came from years of moving through terrain where the ground could betray you if you rushed. Rook didn't follow immediately. He stayed at the edge of the yard, staring into the trees. Then, finally, he turned and trotted after Gideon. But his head kept glancing back, as if memorizing something, as if marking a direction. Gideon loaded what little he had into the truck. Didn't look back at the house. Didn't say goodbye. He had learned a long time ago. Goodbyes only mattered when something was truly yours. Cole stepped closer. "You got somewhere to go?" Gideon paused, thought about it, then shook his head. Cole exhaled slowly. If it gets bad, you can check in at the station, just for a night. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't official. It was a man trying to bend a rule without breaking it. Gideon gave a small nod. Appreciate it. He didn't say he'd go, because he probably wouldn't. He climbed into the truck. Rook jumped in after him, settling into the passenger side but not lying down, not relaxing. Watching. Always watching. The engine turned over with a rough sound, like it too had something to prove. Gideon drove, out of the yard, past the men, past the house, and toward the edge of town. The road stretched ahead, thin, pale, disappearing into trees dusted with frost. The sky above was bright, clear, beautiful in the way that meant danger was coming. Gideon drove until the houses thinned, until the road stopped pretending to belong to anyone. Then he pulled over. The engine idled. Silence filled the cab. Rook shifted, turned his head, looked not forward, not at the road, but back, toward the north, toward the trees. And this time, he didn't hesitate. He stood, let out a sharp bark, then leapt out of the truck before Gideon could stop him. Rook! Too late. The dog was already moving. Not running wildly, running with direction, with purpose. Gideon sat there for a second. Just one. His hands rested on the wheel. His breath visible in the cold air. He could stay. Wait. Find something easier, safer, predictable. Or he could do what he had always done, follow. Gideon stepped out of the truck. Cold air hit him hard, sharp against his face, but he barely noticed. Rook was already at the edge of the tree line, standing still now, looking back just long enough to make sure Gideon was coming. Not asking, expecting. Gideon exhaled. A faint cloud of breath drifted upward and disappeared. Yeah, he muttered. Then he walked forward, into the trees. The forest did not welcome. It watched. Branches held their frost like breath held too long, and the ground beneath Gideon's boots shifted between brittle ice and soft, deceptive patches of earth that had not yet surrendered to the cold. Every step carried a sound crunch, crack, or dull thud, and each sound echoed farther than it should have, swallowed and returned by the tall, silent pines. Gideon moved with purpose. Not quickly. Never quickly in unfamiliar terrain. His posture adjusted instinctively, weight forward, eyes scanning not just ahead, but low, high, peripheral. Old habits, not memories. They lived in the body now, not the mind. Ahead, Rook moved like a shadow that knew where it was going. Not zigzagging, not chasing scent in chaos. A straight line. That was what unsettled Gideon the most. Rook, he called once, not loud. The dog flicked an ear, but didn't slow. Gideon exhaled through his nose. A faint cloud drifted away, lost to the cold. Of course you don't listen now. Still, he followed. Because there had been moments rare, sharp moments when ignoring that instinct had cost something too large to measure. And he wasn't interested in repeating that lesson. The trees thinned without warning. One moment, the forest pressed close. The next, it opened like a curtain pulled aside. And there it was. The house. It did not stand. It endured. A single-story cabin of old timber, long and low, built more for survival than pride. Its wood had aged into a muted gray-brown, each plank etched with the quiet violence of wind and years. Snow rested unevenly across the roof, catching in shallow dips where the structure had begun to sag, but not collapse. The chimney stone, hand-laid, rose from the center like a spine that refused to bend. Smoke lifted from it, thin, but real. Gideon slowed, not because he was afraid, because something about the place demanded it. The yard was small, uneven, edged by a broken fence that leaned more out of memory than strength. A stack of firewood sat near the porch, organized, but not abundant. Enough for days, not weeks. The porch itself held 2 chairs, one missing a slat, the other worn smooth by years of use. Rook stopped at the edge of the clearing, his body stilled. Not alert in the way of danger, but attentive in a deeper sense, as if he had arrived somewhere he recognized. Gideon stepped beside him. "Not exactly what I expected," he muttered. He hadn't expected anything. But this felt like something that had been waiting. Movement. A man. He emerged from the side of the house, half hidden behind the stacked wood, dragging a bundle of branches tied loosely with rope. Amos Bell. 76, maybe older. Tall once, but now the years had pulled him downward, folding his frame into something tighter, more compact. His shoulders still held breadth, but his back curved slightly, as if carrying invisible weight. His face was lined deeply, not just with age, but with long exposure to wind, to labor, to a life that did not offer rest easily. His hair was gray, thin but cut short, practical. No beard. Only rough stubble that came and went depending on how much he cared that week. His hands were the most telling, large, scarred, thick with calluses layered over decades. The kind of hands that remembered every tool they had ever held. He didn't see Gideon at first. His focus was on the wood, on the effort. And then, his boot slipped, not dramatically, just enough. Enough for the weight to shift wrong. The bundle dragged him forward, and his knee hit the frozen ground with a sound that made Gideon's jaw tighten. Amos didn't cry out. He inhaled sharply, held it, and tried to stand. Didn't make it. Gideon was already moving. He crossed the yard in quick, controlled strides, boots biting into the uneven surface. Rook followed, silent, staying slightly behind. "Easy," Gideon said, reaching down. Amos looked up. His eyes were sharp. Still. Even now. "Don't need—" "You do." No softness. No pity. Just fact. That stopped the protest. Amos let Gideon take his arm. The grip was firm, not helping a weak man, but stabilizing someone who still believed he could stand on his own. It mattered. Gideon felt it. Adjusted his hold. And together, they got Amos upright. The older man exhaled slowly, steadying himself. "You always walk out of the woods like that?" Amos asked, voice rough, but not unfriendly. "Only when invited." A pause. Then, something like the ghost of a smile. "Huh." From the doorway, another figure appeared. Evelyn Bell. She was smaller than Amos, much smaller, but she held herself in a way that made space around her feel warmer. 72. Her hair was gray, pulled back loosely, strands escaping in the cold air, and her face carried softness in its lines, but her eyes clear, intelligent mist. Very little. She wore layers. A thick sweater, a worn skirt beneath a heavy outer wrap, and a knitted shawl that clung to her shoulders like something permanent. She coughed once. Then again. Not violently, but enough to show it had been there for a long time. "Amos," she said, stepping down carefully. You shouldn't be. She stopped when she saw Gideon. And Rook. Her gaze lingered on the dog. Not with fear. Recognition. You brought him, she said softly. Gideon blinked once. I didn't bring anyone. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. Sometimes that's not how it works. They moved inside before the cold decided for them. The door closed with a solid sound, not tight but familiar. Inside, the air shifted. Still cold, but not biting. The room was simple. A single space that held everything. A small stove, iron, and blackened from use a wooden table, or scarred but sturdy. 2 chairs that didn't match shelves with books, jars, and things kept. Because they might matter later. The floor creaked under Gideon's weight. He noticed it immediately. Not the sound. The feel. Different. Uneven. Rook moved ahead, circling once, then settling near the far side of the room, closer to the wall than the stove. Gideon noticed that too. Of course he did. They worked without speaking much. Gideon restacked the wood, adjusted the door latch, pressed cloth into the worst gaps in the window frame. Amos protested twice. Stopped the 3rd time. Evelyn moved slowly but efficiently, setting a kettle, checking the stove, her movements practiced and precise. Time passed. The kind that didn't announce itself. Then, Rook stood, not suddenly, deliberately. He walked to the center of the room, lowered his head, and pressed his ear against the floor. He stayed there. Still. Listening. Not to the room, not to the people. Something beneath. A faint vibration, maybe. A shift in air. Or something too subtle for human senses. But not for him. Rook lifted his head, turned slightly, and moved 2 steps to the left. Pressed down again. Then looked at Gideon. Not asking. Telling. Gideon's chest tightened, not from fear. From recognition. He had seen this before. Different place, different mission, same signal. There's something here. What's he doing? Amos asked, watching. Gideon didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer, kneeled, pressed his own palm to the floor. Cold, but not uniform. A faint difference. Small, but real. He moved his hand a few inches. Colder. Back again. Less cold. Gideon frowned. That spot, he said quietly. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. She walked closer, slower this time, her breathing measured. Where? She asked. Rook shifted again, placing himself exactly over the area. Evelyn stared. Then something changed in her expression. Not surprise. Recognition. Old. Buried. Wait, she murmured. She turned, moving to a shelf near the wall, reaching for something wrapped in cloth. Her hands trembled slightly. Not from weakness. From memory. She brought it back carefully. Unwrapped it. A book. Leather-bound. Cracked with age. Edges worn. She held it like something that had once mattered enough to protect. Father's, she said. Her voice softer now. Different. He used to say... She paused, looking at the floor, at Rook, at Gideon. He used to say this house could keep people alive. Amos scoffed lightly. Eve, she didn't look at him. He said it knew how to breathe. Silence. Not empty. Full. Gideon looked down at the floor again. Then at the dog. Then at the book. Something aligned. Not fully, not yet. But enough. What did he mean? Gideon asked. Evelyn met his eyes. and for the first time since he'd arrived. She looked afraid. I don't remember. The house did not sleep. It held. That was the first thing Gideon understood when morning came, not in light, but in temperature. The cold outside had sharpened overnight, cutting through the forest like a blade drawn slowly across bone. Frost clung thicker to the window edges, turning the glass into something blurred and uncertain. But inside, the air was still. Not warm, but not as cold as it should have been. Gideon opened his eyes before the light fully arrived. He did not stretch. He did not linger. Years of training had stripped away those habits. When he woke completely. Rook was already up. The German shepherd stood near the far side of the room, the same place he had settled the night before. His ears were alert, his head slightly tilted, listening not to anything above, but beneath, and his sable coat caught the faint gray of early morning, blending him into the half-light like something carved from the forest itself. Yeah, Gideon muttered, voice low. I feel it too. He swung his legs off the narrow sleeping space they had cleared for him and set his boots on the floor. Cold. But not uniform, again. That same inconsistency. Like stepping on a body where parts still carried warmth and others had already gone stiff. He stood slowly, pressing his weight through the boards, mapping the difference without needing to look down. There, near the center. Less cold. Near the wall. Sharper. Wrong. Gideon exhaled and ran a hand across his face, pushing away sleep that hadn't truly come. Across the room, Amos was already awake. Of course he was. The old man sat at the table, hunched slightly forward, a mug in his hands, though the liquid inside had long since stopped steaming. His eyes weren't on Gideon. They were on the floor, on the same place. You feel it, Amos said. Not a question. Gideon nodded once. Amos grunted softly. Used to be better. That was new. Gideon turned toward him. Used to be? Amos shifted in his seat, the movement careful, controlled. Pain sat somewhere in his body. Gideon could see it in the way the man guarded certain motions without thinking about it. Years ago, Amos said, before things started breaking. Evelyn moved then. She came from the back corner of the room, wrapped tighter in her shawl than the night before. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear, more awake than her body had any right to be. You remember? She asked Amos quietly. He hesitated. That hesitation told Gideon everything. I remember enough, Amos said. Evelyn didn't argue. She rarely did. Gideon was beginning to understand. Instead, she set the leather-bound book on the table between them. The same one. But this time it wasn't just an object pulled from memory. It was being used. Gideon stepped closer. Show me. The pages were brittle. Not fragile, just old. The ink had faded in places, but the lines remained. Drawings, not precise in the way modern blueprints tried to be, but confident. The work of someone who understood not just structure, but behavior. Gideon leaned in. He didn't rush. He read it the way he read terrain. Slowly, building a picture from fragments. There were markings beneath the house, not a full basement. Something else. A gap. A layer between. Air, Gideon murmured. Evelyn looked up. Yes. He traced a finger along one of the drawn channels. This was open once. Amos nodded. Was. What changed? Amos let out a breath through his nose. People fix things, he said, then fix them wrong. Gideon almost smiled. That sounded about right. He flipped the page. More diagrams. Cruder this time. Corrections. Additions. Mistakes. The house hadn't just been built, it had been altered, again and again, until whatever it had been originally wasn't anymore. Outside, the wind shifted. Not stronger. Just different. Rook's head lifted immediately. He moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to look at Gideon. Waiting. Go, Gideon said. The dog slipped outside without hesitation. Gideon followed. The air hit harder than before, colder, sharper. The sky had changed too still clear, but thinner somehow, like the blue had been stretched too far. Rook didn't head into the trees this time. He went to the side of the house, toward the old shed. Gideon's eyes followed. The structure leaned slightly, its wood darker than the house, older, more worn. Snow had gathered unevenly along its base, and the door hung just enough off its hinge to leave a narrow, shifting gap. Rook circled once, then stopped, lowered his head, and began pawing at the ground. Not wildly, deliberately. Gideon approached slowly. Every instinct he had told him this mattered. The ground here was different, and he crouched, brushing away the top layer of snow. The earth beneath wasn't frozen solid. It gave slightly under pressure. That shouldn't have been possible. Not here. Not now. Gideon pressed harder. The surface broke. And beneath it, stone. Flat. Placed. Not natural. Rook froze, mid-motion. His ears snapped forward, body going rigid, not in alertness, but in recognition. Then, slowly, he lowered himself, not lying down fully, but pressing his chest close to the ground, as if feeling something through it. Not listening. Feeling. Gideon held still. And for a moment, just a moment, he felt it too. Not heat. Not exactly. A faint movement. Like breath. Not air moving across skin, but something deeper. Slower. Alive. The ground beneath the shed wasn't just different. It was active. Gideon stood slowly. "Amos," he called. The old man took longer to reach them than Gideon would have liked, but he came. Each step was measured, careful, but stubborn. What is it?" Amos asked. Gideon pointed. Amos stared at the exposed stone. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "Damn it." Evelyn appeared behind him, slower still, but her gaze was already fixed. "That's it," she whispered. "That's what he built." Gideon looked between them. "Then why isn't it working?" Amos gave a short, humorless laugh. "You ever seen a machine survive 50 years of people who don't understand it?" Gideon nodded. "Too many times." He crouched again, clearing more of the surface. The stone extended outward, forming a narrow channel, half collapsed in places, filled with dirt and debris in others. Blocked. "Air's supposed to move through here," Gideon said. Evelyn nodded. "Through the ground, into the space under the floor. And out somewhere else," Gideon added. "Or it just sits and dies." Amos shifted his weight. "Used to flow," he said. "Back when my legs worked right." That caught Gideon's attention. "You worked on this?" Amos snorted. Tried not to. That was the old man's thing." Evelyn's father. Gideon looked back at the channel. "Then we clear it." Amos shook his head. "Not that simple." Gideon glanced at him. "Nothing is." They started anyway, because there was nothing else to do. Gideon worked with what he had. Hands. A broken tool. Persistence. He cleared dirt, stone, old leaves packed tight from years of neglect. The channel revealed itself slowly, like something waking reluctantly. Rook stayed close, not interfering. Watching. Always watching. By midday, they had opened a small section. Not enough. But something. Gideon stepped back. Let's see. He waited. Nothing happened. The air didn't shift. The house didn't change. The cold remained exactly as it was. Amos crossed his arms. Told you. Gideon didn't respond. He was already looking at the ground again. At the slope. At the direction of the channel. Something was off. He crouched, tracing the line with his eyes. Wrong angle, he said. Evelyn blinked. What? Gideon stood. The flow's reversed. Amos frowned. That doesn't make sense. It does if someone blocked the exit and opened something else, Gideon replied. He turned toward the house. Air's coming in wrong. And if air moved wrong, it didn't warm. It drained. Gideon looked at the structure, at the patched walls, the shifted boards, the repairs done over years without understanding. Someone had tried to fix the house, and in doing so, had slowly broken it. The wind picked up slightly. Not a storm, not yet, but enough to whisper through the trees. Gideon straightened. We're not fixing it today. Amos gave a short nod. Figured. Evelyn held the book tighter. But you understand it, she said. Not hope. Not yet. But something close. Gideon looked at the house, at the shed, at the ground that refused to freeze properly, at the dog who had led him here. Not all of it, he said. Then, after a pause, but enough to know it's still there, the road back to town felt shorter. Not because the distance had changed, but because Gideon no longer walked it as a man passing through. He walked it as a man carrying something unfinished. The morning had burned away its softness. What remained was a sharper light, brittle against the frost. Every surface seemed harder, more defined, as if the world itself had tightened. Rook moved beside him, not ahead this time. Close, deliberate. His ears shifted constantly, catching sounds Gideon couldn't hear yet, but Gideon trusted the pattern. The dog wasn't searching now. He was measuring. Gideon adjusted the strap of the worn canvas bag over his shoulder. Inside were the few things he needed, tools, mostly. Things that could be used to fix or break, depending on the moment. He wasn't sure yet which this day would require. Osmoro Ridge came into view slowly, rising from the tree line like something built more from habit than design. Cabins scattered across uneven ground. Smoke lifting from chimneys, some thick, some weak. Too many weak. Gideon noticed that first. He always noticed the signs that didn't belong. Near the center of town, a small structure sat at the crossroads, a general supply store, wood-sided, modest, but standing straighter than most. The sign above the door read, Hensley Provisions. Rook paused. Not because of danger, because of scent. Gideon felt it too. The faint mix of oil, wood, dried goods, and something warmer beneath. Human presence. Stability. Yeah, Gideon muttered. Let's see what passes for supplies around here. Inside, the air changed. Warmer. Not by much, but enough to relax muscles that had been holding tension without permission. A bell above the door gave a small, tired chime. Behind the counter stood Clara Hensley, late 40s, maybe early 50s, yet tall for a woman her age, with a build that suggested she had spent her life lifting things rather than avoiding them. Her hair, once dark, had faded into a streaked mix of brown and gray, pulled back loosely at the nape of her neck. Her skin carried the roughness of cold climates lined not by age alone, but by years of wind and dry air. Her eyes were steady, observant, not unkind, but not easily impressed. She looked at Gideon once, then at Rook, then back at Gideon. "You're the one got pushed out," she said. No greeting, no pretense, just fact. Gideon nodded. "Seems to be going around." Clara's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Not as much as you'd think," she replied. She stepped out from behind the counter, moving with quiet efficiency. "Dog yours?" "Yeah." Rook stood still, calm but alert. His tail didn't wag. His posture wasn't submissive or aggressive, just present. Clara crouched slightly, not reaching out, just lowering her level. "Smart. You working dog?" she asked, voice softer now. Rook's ears flicked. Gideon answered. "Always has been." Clara nodded once. "Figures?" She straightened and turned toward a shelf, pulling down a small bundle of supplies, nails, cloth, a coil of thin wire. "Bell Place," she said. "That where you're headed?" Gideon paused. Was, she echoed. She set the items on the counter. "Then you know they won't make it through winter like that." Not a question. A statement shared between people who understood what winter did to weak structures. Gideon rested his hand lightly on the counter. "They had something built into that house once." Clara's eyes sharpened. "Old Man Bell's father," she said. "People used to talk about it." Gideon leaned slightly forward. "What kind of talk?" Clara shrugged. "The kind that gets called nonsense until it works." She slid the supplies closer. "No charge." Gideon frowned. I didn't say you couldn't," she interrupted. "I said you don't need to." A beat, then quieter. "You're not fixing a house." Her gaze flicked toward the door. "You're fixing a mistake." Outside, the wind had shifted again. Not stronger, but colder. Rook stepped out first this time, nose low, scanning. Gideon followed, the bag heavier now, not from weight, but from implication. He didn't like people giving things away without reason. But Clara hadn't been offering charity. She had been investing. He didn't make it far before another voice cut through the quiet. "Thorn." Gideon stopped, turned. Elias Boone approached from across the road. 45, broad, thick through the shoulders and chest. Not from training, but from years of physical work layered with confidence that bordered on arrogance. His beard was trimmed short but uneven, more habit than style. His coat was heavy, well-kept, and newer than most things in this town. His eyes carried something Gideon recognized instantly. Certainty. The dangerous kind. The kind that didn't question itself. "I heard you're playing carpenter out at the Bell Place," Boone said, stopping a few feet away. Gideon didn't respond immediately. Let the silence stretch. Boone shifted his weight, impatient. "That house is done," Boone continued. "Been done for years. You patch it all you want, winter's still gonna take it." Gideon met his gaze. "Maybe." Boone scoffed. "Maybe," he repeated. "You one of those guys who thinks muscle solves everything?" Gideon's voice stayed even. "No." Boone tilted his head slightly. "Then what? You think you found something no one else did?" A pause. Gideon considered the question, then answered honestly. "I think people stopped looking." Boone's expression hardened. Not anger, but resistance. "Or maybe," Boone said slowly, "they already knew there was nothing worth finding." Rook moved suddenly, not toward Boone, not toward Gideon. He stepped past both men, am crossing the road in a straight line before stopping near a shallow dip in the ground just beyond the buildings. He stood there, still, then pawed once at the surface. Snow scattered, revealing bare earth, not frozen, not even close. In the middle of a town where everything else had already started to harden. Rook didn't look back. He just stood over it, as if marking something, as if showing. Gideon felt it again, that shift in his chest, that quiet, undeniable signal. Not coincidence, pattern. Boone noticed it too. His brow furrowed. What the hell is that? Gideon walked over slowly, crouching beside the exposed patch. He pressed his hand down. Warm wasn't the word, but it wasn't cold. Not like it should be. He looked up at Boone. You ever see that before? Boone hesitated. And that hesitation, that was the first crack. No, Boone admitted. Gideon stood. Then maybe there's more going on under this place than you think. Boone didn't answer immediately. He stared at the ground, then at Rook, then back at Gideon. For the first time since the conversation began, he wasn't certain. The moment passed, like all moments did. Boone straightened. Doesn't change the storm, he said, voice harder now. When it hits, none of this matters. Gideon nodded. That's where you're wrong. Boone's jaw tightened. You don't know this place, he said. Gideon turned slightly, looking back toward the trees. No, he agreed, then quieter. But I know what happens when people trust the wrong thing to keep them alive. Boone didn't follow. Couldn't, not yet. Gideon picked up his bag. See you, he said. Not friendly, not hostile, just inevitable. They walked out of town the same way they had entered, but something had changed. Not in the world, in the way it felt. Rook stayed close again, but his attention kept drifting toward the ground, toward the air, toward things that didn't line up the way they should. Gideon noticed more now, too. Subtle differences. Patches of frost that didn't match. And wind that moved unevenly. Signs. Always signs. By the time the Bell House came back into view, the sky had begun to thin again, the blue stretching into something colder, more fragile. Amos stood outside, leaning on the railing, waiting. He didn't ask questions when Gideon approached. Didn't need to. He could read enough from the man's face. Evelyn opened the door before they reached it, as if she had been listening, not for footsteps, for something else. You found something, she said. Gideon stepped inside, set the bag down, looked at the floor, at the walls, at the house that was slowly remembering what it used to be. Yeah, he said. Then, after a pause, and it's not just here. By the time the sky changed, it was already too late. Not dramatically. Not in the way storms announce themselves in stories, with thunder or sudden darkness. This one arrived quietly, like a thought that had been forming long before anyone noticed. The air thinned. That was the first sign. Gideon felt it when he stepped outside before dawn, the cold pressing sharper against his skin, as if it had learned something new overnight. His breath came out slower, heavier, lingering longer before fading. Rook stood beside him, still as carved stone. No restless shifting, no scanning. Just waiting. The trees no longer whispered. They held their silence. And that silence, it wasn't calm. It was pressure. Inside the house, the air felt different too. Not warm, but alive. Gideon crouched near the section of floor they had exposed and adjusted the last piece of wood, fitting it carefully over the newly cleared channel beneath. It wasn't perfect, nothing about this was, but it was enough to allow movement. Air didn't need perfection. It needed direction. Amos stood nearby, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, watching with a mixture of skepticism and reluctant respect. "You really think this'll do anything?" Amos asked. Gideon didn't look up. "It already is." Amos grunted. Didn't argue. Because he felt it too. The difference. Subtle, but present. Evelyn sat at the table, the old leather book open in front of her. Her fingers rested lightly on the page, not tracing the lines, just remembering them. Her breathing was quieter today, more controlled, though every now and then a faint tightness crossed her chest. She didn't complain. She never did. But Gideon noticed. He always noticed. The first snow began just after noon. Not soft flakes, hard, fine. Almost like sand. It struck the windows with a faint, steady hiss, building layer by layer without drama. The sky above turned a pale, stretched gray, losing its depth. "Not good," Amos muttered. Gideon nodded. "Not normal." Rook lifted his head slightly, listening. Then he moved. Walking a slow perimeter of the room, checking each wall, each gap, each corner as if memorizing the space. Not nervous. Preparing. By late afternoon, the wind came. Not as a gust. As a presence. It pressed against the house, testing it, finding its edges. The walls creaked not from weakness, but from resistance. Gideon stood near the door, hand resting lightly against the wood. Feeling. The pressure shifted, different angles, different intensity. The house was being read, just as he had read it. "Fire," Gideon said. Amos moved immediately. The stove came alive, not roaring, not wasteful, but steady. Controlled heat. Enough to feed the system, not fight the storm. Gideon adjusted the venting they had reopened, watching the faint movement of air near the floor. There. Subtle, but moving. Not pooling. Not dying. Flowing. Evelyn closed the book. "You're right," she said softly. Gideon glanced at her. She nodded once. "It's breathing again." The first knock came before dark. 3 sharp hits against the door. Not frantic, but urgent. Rook was already there before Gideon moved, standing between the door and the room, body tense, not aggressive, but ready. Gideon opened the door. Cold rushed in like something alive. And with it, a man. Mid-50s. Face pale from exposure, beard crusted with ice, eyes wide, not with panic, but with the slow, dawning understanding of how bad things had become. Gideon recognized him. Not by name, by position. One of the men who had stood on his porch. Not Calder, but close enough to matter. "Please," the man said, voice rough, controlled but breaking at the edges. "My wife, she's—" Gideon stepped aside. No hesitation. "Let's bring her in." The man turned, helping a woman forward. She was wrapped in layers too thin for what was coming. Her movements sluggish, her face flushed in the wrong way, heat trapped where it shouldn't be. Hypothermia wasn't always cold. Sometimes it burned. Evelyn was already moving. "Here," she said, guiding the woman to a chair closer to the stove. Amos added wood. Not too much. Never too much. Gideon closed the door. The wind hit it hard this time. Harder. As if angered. Rook didn't settle. He didn't relax. Instead, he turned sharply away from the door toward the far wall. Toward the floor. He moved quickly, placing himself over a section near the edge of the room, lowering his head, pressing down, not listening, not smelling, feeling. Then he let out a low, sharp bark. Not at the door, Not at the storm. At the ground, Gideon's pulse shifted. Something had changed, not outside, what's inside the system. The flow, it wasn't steady anymore. Gideon dropped to one knee, pressing his hand against the floor again. There it was. The movement had altered. Not stopped, but strained. Like breath pulled through a narrowing space. He looked up at Amos. Something's blocking it. Amos frowned. Now? Gideon nodded. Under the house or beyond it? Evelyn's voice came, steady despite everything. The lower channel, she said. The one near the shed. Gideon stood immediately. I'll check. Amos grabbed his arm. You go out there now. You don't come back. Gideon met his eyes. Flat. Certain. If I don't fix it, this place won't hold. A beat. Then Amos let go. Not because he agreed, because he understood. The door opened again. The storm hit harder this time, wind, and snow slicing sideways, visibility reduced to almost nothing. Gideon stepped out. The cold bit deeper now, sharper, more aggressive. Rook didn't hesitate. He followed. Of course he did. They moved along the side of the house, bodies angled against the wind. Snow stung exposed skin like fine needles, and the ground had begun to shift underfoot, drifts forming unevenly, hiding what lay beneath. The shed loomed ahead, darker now, almost swallowed by the storm. Gideon reached it first, forced the door open. Inside, the air was different. Not warmer, but contained. Rook moved immediately to the spot they had uncovered earlier, pawing once, twice, then stepping back. Gideon dropped to his knees, clearing snow, dirt, debris that had blown back into the opening. The channel. Clogged again. Faster than it should have been. That meant something, not just neglect, pressure. The storm wasn't just outside, it was pushing into the ground. Gideon worked fast, hands moving without hesitation, clearing, adjusting, reopening the path. Rook stayed close, watching the edges, and alert to anything Gideon couldn't see. Minutes stretched, or maybe seconds. Time lost meaning in the cold. Then, a shift, subtle, but real. The resistance eased. The flow returned. Not strong, but steady. Enough. Gideon exhaled sharply. Good, he muttered. Rook's ears relaxed slightly. Just enough. They made it back to the house without speaking. The door closed behind them with effort. Inside, the air had changed again. Not dramatically, but enough. Evelyn looked up immediately. It's better, she said. Gideon nodded. For now. The man who had arrived earlier sat near the stove, his wife wrapped in blankets, her breathing steadier now. He looked at Gideon with something like disbelief. How did you? Gideon shook his head. Doesn't matter. Because it didn't. Not right now. What mattered was the house still held. The storm deepened. Outside, the world disappeared. Inside, the space shrank, not physically, but in feeling. Every sound mattered, every shift in air, every crack of wood, every breath. Where Gideon didn't sit, didn't rest. He moved slowly through the room, checking each point, each seam, each sign of failure. Rook followed. Not behind. Beside. Always beside. Night came without darkness. The storm made sure of that. A constant gray pressed against the windows, erasing the difference between day and night. Time became something measured only by endurance. And then, another knock. Fainter this time. But there. Gideon turned toward the door. Rook was already there. Not barking. Not warning. Just standing. Waiting. Gideon reached for the handle. Paused. Not from fear. From understanding. This wasn't over. Not even close. He opened the door. And the storm breathed in. The storm did not rage. It consumed. By morning, there was no sky, only a vast, shifting white that erased distance, direction, and reason. The trees had disappeared into it. The shed, 10 paces from the door, was now a shape that came and went like a thought you couldn't hold. Inside the cabin, time had narrowed to breath, heat, and sound. Gideon stood near the wall where the floor felt truest, where the faint, steady current beneath the boards still moved like something stubborn and alive. He didn't lean. He didn't sit. He held the space the way a man holds a line he refuses to let break. Rook stayed close to him, not restless, not calm, attentive. His amber eyes tracked the room, then the door, then the floor again, mapping a world that had shrunk to the size of a single room. Amos sat at the table, though sat wasn't the word anymore. Yet he braced himself there, shoulders hunched, one hand gripping the edge as if the wood could anchor him against the cold, pressing from all sides. His face had lost color, but not clarity. He was still measuring, still calculating. Evelyn moved between people because there were people now. More than before. They had come in waves through the night, each arrival quieter than the last, as if the storm was learning to take voices first. The room had filled not just with bodies, but with the fragile heat of fear, exhaustion, and hope that didn't quite trust itself. Near the stove sat the couple from the night before, the man hunched forward, hands clasped, eyes hollowed by lack of sleep. His wife, wrapped in layers of blankets, breathed slowly, the color in her face returning in uneven patches. Next to them, a new figure. Martha Ellison. 60, thin to the point of fragility, but with a posture that refused to bend completely. Her hair was silver white, braided loosely over one shoulder, with strands escaping in every direction. Her face carried deep lines that spoke not just of age, but of worry practiced over years. Her hands trembled, not from cold alone, from memory. She clutched a small cloth bundle in her lap, fingers tightening and loosening around it like a rhythm she couldn't stop. "Water," Evelyn said gently, pressing a cup into Martha's hands. Martha nodded, lips moving before sound came. "Thank you. Thank you." Her voice was thin, but persistent, like someone who had learned that speaking even softly kept you anchored. The room adjusted itself around them, not physically, but in attention. Every new arrival shifted the balance: heat, space, air. Gideon tracked it all without looking like he was tracking anything. The system beneath the floor still moved. Barely. But enough. He felt it through his boots. A slow, steady current. Not warmth, not comfort, but survival. Another knock. This time, it wasn't sharp. It was wrong. A dull, uneven impact against the door, followed by silence. Rook's head snapped up, his body tensed, not in defense, but in recognition of something failing. Gideon crossed the room in 3 strides, opened the door. The storm lunged in wind, ice, white that swallowed edges, and within it, a shape. Half collapsed against the frame. Gideon caught him before he hit the floor. The man was younger than most who had come. Early 30s. Lean, but not strong-built for speed. Not endurance. His coat was too light, his gloves mismatched, his face nearly colorless beneath a crust of ice that had formed along his lashes. Caleb Rowe. Gideon didn't know the name yet, but he knew the type. The kind who thought he could outrun things. The kind who learned too late that some things didn't chase. They waited. "Inside," Gideon said, already moving. Rook stepped back, making space without being told. They laid Caleb near the stove, careful, controlled. Evelyn moved immediately, checking his breathing, and his hands, his face. "He's not gone," she said. Not hope, assessment. Amos shifted in his chair, watching. "Another one," he muttered. Not complaint. Recognition. The door closed again. The world shrank once more. Rook did something then he hadn't done before. He didn't go to the door. Didn't circle the room. He walked directly to Martha. Stopped. And placed his head gently against her knee. Still. Not asking. Not seeking comfort. Offering it. Martha froze. Her trembling hands stilled mid-motion. For a long moment she didn't breathe. Then slowly her fingers moved, resting lightly on the dog's head. Her grip tightened. Not hard, but certain, and for the first time since she had entered. Her shaking stopped. Gideon watched. Didn't comment. Didn't need to. There were things dogs understood that men spent entire lives trying to name. The storm intensified, not in sound, in pressure. The walls held, but they felt it now. Every gust pressed deeper, testing not just the wood, but the spaces between. Gideon moved back to the section of floor he trusted most. Knelt, pressed his hand down. The flow was still there, but thinner, strained. He closed his eyes briefly, mapped it, the intake, the channel, the space beneath, the exit. Something was changing again, not blocked, distorted. "Amos," Gideon said quietly. The old man looked up. "You feel that?" Amos shifted his boots slightly, then nodded once. "Yeah." Gideon stood. "Air's not moving clean anymore." Evelyn glanced up from where she knelt beside Caleb. "What does that mean?" "It means we're holding," Gideon said. Then, "But not well." Silence. Not fear, understanding. They adjusted, because that's what people did when they wanted to live. Amos fed the stove small amounts, steady, never letting it spike too high. Evelyn shifted people closer, tighter, redistributing space not by comfort, but by need. Gideon opened and closed vents in small increments, watching how the air responded, listening to something no one else could hear. Rook moved between them all, checking, watching, remembering. Hours passed, or minutes. Time had no meaning here, only endurance. Caleb stirred first. A shallow inhale, then another. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused, then sharpened as reality returned in pieces. "Where?" he rasped. "Inside," Gideon said. Caleb blinked, looked around, at the people, at the space, at the impossibility of it. "I thought," he trailed off. Gideon didn't ask what he thought. It didn't matter. He was here. That was enough. Martha spoke again, her voice steadier now. "They said no one would make it," she murmured. Not to anyone in particular. Just into the room. Amos snorted softly. "People say a lot of things." Gideon didn't respond. Because he knew? People said things until reality corrected them, and reality was doing that now. Slowly, relentlessly. The floor creaked, a small sound, but wrong. Gideon turned immediately. Not fear. Focus. He stepped across the room, pressing his weight carefully. Testing. There. A section near the wall. Colder. Sharper. He crouched, ran his hand along the seam. The flow had shifted again. Not stopped, but redirected. He exhaled slowly. This house, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else, doesn't like what we've done to it. Evelyn looked up. It's not the house, she said. It's what we forgot. Gideon met her gaze. And for a moment, he almost believed that. Outside, the storm continued its quiet destruction. Inside, the house held. Not perfectly, not easily, but it held. Rook returned to Gideon's side. Sat, not laying down, not resting. Just present. Gideon looked down at him, then back at the room, at the people who had come, at the space that was no longer just a house. It was something else now. Something that didn't belong to any one person. Something that existed because it had to. Another sound at the door. Not a knock this time. More like something brushing against it. Or leaning. Gideon moved toward it. Rook stood. Amos didn't speak. Evelyn didn't stop him. Because they all knew this wasn't finished. It wouldn't be finished until the storm decided it was. Gideon reached for the handle. Paused for a single breath. Then opened it. And the white came with it. The storm did not end. It withdrew. Like something that had tested its strength against the living and decided, for now, to loosen its grip. Morning came not with light, but with silence. The kind of silence that follows something enormous. Inside the cabin, no one moved at first. Not because they were asleep, because they were listening, waiting for the next sound that might mean the storm had changed its mind. Gideon stood near the door, hand resting lightly against the wood. He could feel it now. Not pressure, not force. Absence. The wind was gone, not weakened. Gone. Rook was already at the threshold, body still, ears forward, but relaxed in a way he had not been since the storm began. His tail lowered naturally, not in tension, not in fear. He looked at Gideon, then at the door. Not asking, knowing. Gideon nodded once. All right. He opened it. The world outside did not rush in. It waited. The landscape had been remade. Where there had been paths, there were now drifts. Where there had been distance, there was only white. The trees stood buried halfway up their trunks, their branches heavy, silent witnesses to something that had passed through them without asking permission. The sky was sharp again, a clear, piercing blue that made everything below it look unreal, beautiful, and cruel. Gideon stepped out. The snow sank beneath his boots, deeper than expected, shifting with each step, as if the ground itself had forgotten its shape. Rook followed, moving more easily, his body cutting through the surface with practiced efficiency. Behind them, the door opened again. One by one, the others stepped out. Slowly, carefully, as if leaving something sacred. Amos came first. He stood on the porch, one hand gripping the railing, his eyes moving across the landscape, not in wonder, but in calculation. Taking stock, counting what was lost, what remained. Evelyn stood just behind him, her shawl wrapped tightly, her face pale but steady. She didn't look at the snow first. She looked at the house, at the walls, at the roof, at the structure that it held. Her hand moved instinctively, resting against the wood. A gesture of gratitude. Not to the house, to what it had remembered. Others followed. Martha stepped out slowly, her movements cautious but no longer trembling. The lines in her face remained, but something beneath them had changed. Less fear, more presence. She held her small cloth bundle tightly still, but not as if it might disappear. Caleb came next, supported slightly by the doorframe as he stepped into the light. His face had regained color, though the experience had carved something into him that would not fade quickly. His eyes moved across the horizon, slower now, more deliberate. He would not mistake the world again, not like before. They stood together, not speaking, because there was nothing to say that would not sound smaller than what they had lived through. The walk back to town was not a journey. It was a realization. The path had vanished, but direction remained. Gideon moved first, not leading, but moving with enough certainty that others could follow. Rook stayed close, occasionally stepping ahead to test the ground, then circling back, marking the safest way through a world that had lost its edges. Snow reached past their knees in places, shifting, unstable. Every step mattered. Every misstep cost energy no one had to spare. They moved as a group, not because they chose to, because separation was no longer an option. The town appeared slowly. At first, only shapes, then structures, then truth. Houses leaned, some partially collapsed under the weight of snow. Others stood, but wrong windows frosted from the inside, doors sealed by drifts, chimneys silent. The absence of smoke told Gideon everything. He didn't slow, or didn't look away. He had seen this before. Different place, different cause. Same result. They reached the first house. Amos stopped, just for a second. His eyes lingered on the door, then moved on. Because some things didn't need to be opened to be understood. Further in, movement. A figure. Then another. People, alive. Not many, but some. They looked at the group as if seeing something that didn't belong to the same reality they had just survived, as if the people walking out of that white horizon carried something impossible with them, and maybe they did. At the center of town, the remaining people gathered. Not formally, not organized. Just drawn together. Because survival had stripped away everything else. Calder Wren stood among them. But he didn't look the same. The precision was still there. The control. But something had fractured. His coat was no longer clean. His posture no longer untouched by the world. His eyes. They held something new. Something closer to doubt. But he stepped forward. Not with authority. With effort. "Mr. Thorne," he said. The title sounded different now. Less official. More human. Gideon stopped. Waited. Calder took a breath. "I was told," he began, then stopped. Restarted. "I was wrong." The words did not come easily. They weren't meant to. He had built a life on certainty. And certainty did not bend without breaking something. "The debt," Calder continued, his voice steadier now, "is no longer relevant." A pause. Then clearer. "The property will be returned to you." Gideon didn't react immediately, because the words didn't land the way Calder expected them to. They weren't a victory. They were late. Calder saw it. Of course he did. "The situation has changed," he added. Gideon nodded once. Yes. It had, in ways paper could not record. Reverend Miller stood nearby, thinner now, his face drawn in a way that had nothing to do with age. His voice, when he spoke, was quieter than before. "I spoke of faith," he said, "and did not recognize it when I saw it." He looked at Evelyn, not Gideon. "Forgive me." Evelyn inclined her head slightly, not absolution, not rejection, not acknowledgement. Elias Boone stood apart from the others, not distant, but not fully within the group. His arms were crossed, but not defensively. Thinking. He watched Gideon, then Rook, then the people who had returned. Finally, he spoke. "My house didn't hold," he said. No excuse, no explanation. Just fact. He looked at his hands, then back up. "You going to show me how yours did?" It wasn't a challenge. It was a question asked by a man who had lost the right to assume he already knew the answer. Gideon studied him, saw the shift. Small, but real. Then nodded. "Yeah." Because that was how things changed. Not all at once, but enough. Rook moved then. Not toward Gideon. Not toward the people. He stepped past them, walking slowly across the snow-covered ground until he reached a spot just beyond the edge of the gathered group. He stopped, or lowered his head, and pressed his nose into the snow. Then he dug. Once, twice, 3 times. The snow broke away, revealing dark earth beneath. Not frozen, not dead. Alive. Rook looked up. Not at anyone. At the ground itself, as if acknowledging something that had always been there. Waiting. Gideon watched, and understood. Not everything, but enough. Days passed. Slowly. The town did not rebuild immediately. It couldn't. It had to understand first. Gideon returned to the Bell House, not as a visitor, as someone who had become part of its function. Amos worked beside him, not as a man being helped, as a man who still had something to give. Evelyn taught, not from memory alone, but from rediscovery. The book opened again, this time not as a relic, as instruction. Clara brought materials, not as charity, as contribution. Boone learned, not easily, but honestly. Calder watched, then signed what needed to be signed, not because he had to. That's because he understood that what had been built here could not be measured in the way he was used to measuring things. The house did not become new. It remained what it had always been. Old, weathered, imperfect. But now, understood. Gideon stood on the porch one morning as the snow began to soften, the edges of the world returning slowly, reluctantly. Rook lay nearby, stretched out, eyes half closed, but still aware, always aware. Amos worked in the yard. Evelyn moved inside, her voice carrying faintly through the open door. Life. Returning. Not loudly, but steadily. "You staying?" Amos called out. Gideon considered the question. Not for long. Long enough. "Yeah," he said, "because some places didn't belong to you, until you chose to belong to them. There are winters in life that no fire can defeat, not because we lack warmth, but because we trust the wrong things to protect us." This story was never just about a house, or a storm, or even survival. It was about a quiet truth many forget. Sometimes, what saves us is not something new, but something God has already placed beneath our feet, waiting for us to notice. The miracle was not loud. It did not come with thunder or light. It came through wisdom passed down, through humility, through a man who chose to follow instead of walk away, and through a dog who listened to something deeper than reason. Maybe that is how God works in our lives too. Not always by changing the storm, but by guiding us toward the place where we can endure it. In our everyday lives, we all face moments where things collapse, where we feel pushed out, lost, or forgotten. But even then, there may be something quietly holding us up, an opportunity, a person, a lesson, a path we didn't expect. The question is not whether help exists. The question is whether we are willing to see it. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to share it with someone who might need it today. Leave a comment and tell me where you are watching from, or what part of this story stayed with you the most. And if you believe in stories that remind us of hope, resilience, and something greater guiding our steps, subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing more journeys like this together. May God watch over you, protect your path, and bring warmth into your life, especially in the moments when the world feels coldest.